The galaxy is a tapestry of infinite threads, each a civilization, a culture, a way of life. Some threads are bold and crimson, woven from empires that span star clusters. Others are cool, shimmering silver, the color of ancient, enigmatic wisdom. And then, there is the thread of humanity. A new thread. A rough, unassuming shade of brown, recently introduced to the loom. To the older, grander threads, it was barely noticeable. Insignificant. Our story does not begin with a bang, or a war, or a grand discovery. It begins with a diplomatic gaffe. A colossal, universe-altering, foot-in-mouth catastrophe. The Vlar Imperium is one of those crimson threads. A species of immense stature and predatory grace, the Vlar are bipedal, with chitinous plates of iridescent black that shift to deep violet in the right light. They stand 8 feet tall with 4 arms, the lower set for brute strength, the upper for delicate, precise work. Their faces are elegant, sharp, dominated by large, multifaceted eyes that see in a spectrum of colors unknown to us. They are old, proud, and their societal structure is a rigid, unshakable hierarchy, capped by a single, absolute monarch, the Extra, the Emperor-Sovereign. For the last 5 standard cycles, the Terran Confederacy has been trying to secure a trade and non-aggression pact with the Vlar. It was the human diplomatic corps' white whale. A success here would cement our place in the galactic community. A failure would relegate us to the status of backwater curiosities for centuries. The venue for this final make-or-break negotiation was the Vlar throne world, a planet-sized city of obsidian spires and crystalline gardens that floated in the silent, star-dusted void. And the lead negotiator was Ambassador Eris Thorn. Eris was good, calm, patient, and possessing a dry wit that usually served him well. But even he was feeling the strain. For weeks, he and his team had been mired in the most excruciatingly complex and frustrating negotiations of his life. The Vlar were not hostile, merely immovable. Their protocols were a labyrinth, their language a minefield of implied meanings and unspoken contexts. Every clause, every subclause, was debated with the passion of someone discussing the weather. And at the center of it all, observing everything with those unreadable kaleidoscopic eyes, was the Extra herself. She was magnificent, terrifying, and utterly inscrutable. She never spoke during the negotiations, her silence a weight that pressed down on the entire chamber. Her title, as the translators painstakingly explained, was not just Queen. It was the pinnacle, the unmoved, the final arbiter. To the Vlar, she was not just a ruler, she was the living embodiment of their civilization's will. The humans, in their private briefings, had given her a nickname, Her Impenetrable Majesty. Narrator. The final day of the negotiated window had arrived. The air in the throne room was cool and thin, carrying the faint scent of ozone and exotic blooms. Eris stood before the raised dais, his dress uniform feeling stiff and alien. Beside him, his cultural attaché, Dr. Lena Petrova, shifted nervously. Across from them, the Vlar High Chancellor, a venerable old being named Kthar, droned on about the nuances of crystalline intellectual property rights for the 3rd hour. The proposed Clause 7b, subsection Gamma, regarding the resonant frequency identification of psiogems, Kthar intoned, his voice a dry rustle, is unacceptably vague. It presupposes a Terran capacity for spectral analysis that, with all due respect, your species has not yet demonstrated. Eris felt a muscle in his jaw twitch. They had provided the demonstration data twice. He took a slow, quiet breath. Patience. It's a game. It's all a game. His eyes, against his better judgment, drifted to the Extra. She was seated on her throne, a masterpiece of carved living crystal. That seemed to drink the light. She was still as a statue, only the slow rhythmic pulsing of the bioluminescent nodes along her neck and temples indicating she was alive. What was she thinking? Was she bored? Annoyed? Did she even understand the monumental pettiness of this entire process? The negotiations dragged on. Tariff schedules. Transit lane permissions. Cultural exchange programs that the Vlar seemed to view as a form of contamination. With every passing hour, Eris felt the chance of a treaty slipping away. Humanity was being judged, and found wanting. Not because we were weak or poor or technologically backward in all areas, but because we were messy. Our legal frameworks were flexible. Our art was emotional. Our social structures were fluid. To the Vlar, it was all chaos. Uncontrolled. Undignified. During a brief recess, Eris and Lena huddled in an antechamber. "They're stonewalling us, Eris," Lena whispered, her face pale. "It's not about the clauses. It's about us. We don't fit their model of a civilized species." "I know," Eris sighed, running a hand through his hair. "But what's the alternative? We walk away? The Confederacy will have my head. We need this alliance. The Crick's hegemony is getting bolder on the rim. Without the Vlar as a counterweight." "I've been reviewing their sociolinguistic data packs," Lena said, pulling up a datapad. "Their entire culture is built on concepts of permanence, fixed purpose, and unassailable hierarchy. Jokes, irony, sarcasm. They have no direct translations. Their language is brutally literal in formal settings. We might as well be speaking gibberish when we try to be personable." Eris nodded, a grim smile on his face. "So no cracking a joke to break the ice, then?" "God, no," Lena said, her eyes wide. "The ice, as you put it, is the foundation of their society. To break it would be the ultimate insult." The final session reconvened. It was the last item, the formal ratification ceremony. Should an agreement be reached? Kthar was explaining the ritualistic phrasing, the precise angle of bow, the acceptable duration of eye contact with the extra. It was another list of impossible minutiae. Eris felt the last of his hope drain away. This was it. They were going to fail because he might blink for a millisecond too long. He looked at the extra. She was watching him, her head tilted a fraction of a degree. Was that curiosity? Or was it the look a biologist gives a peculiar insect before pinning it to a board? In that moment, the sheer, absurd pomposity of it all overwhelmed him. The weeks of stress, the sleepless nights, the galactic future of humanity resting on his ability to not slouch. It coalesced into a single reckless spark of gallows humor. As Kthar finished his monologue, a lull fell over the chamber. It was the human delegation's turn to acknowledge the instructions. All eyes were on Eris. He should have said, "The Terran Confederacy understands and will comply with the stipulated protocols." That is not what he said. He gave a small, tired but genuine smile, looked directly at the silent, majestic, terrifying alien queen, and said, his voice soft but clear in the cavernous room, "You know, with all this talk of ceremonies and partnerships, you'd make a cute wife." The silence that followed was not the silence of before. This was a different quality of silence. It was a physical thing, thick and heavy, like a shroud. The Vlar delegates froze. Their multifaceted eyes widened. The subtle humming of the chamber's environmental systems seemed to vanish, as if the very ship had gasped. Kthar took a sharp hissing intake of breath, his chitinous plates clamping shut with an audible clack. Lena Petrova made a small, choked sound next to Eris, her hand darting out to grip his arm, her knuckles white. "Eris," she breathed, a whisper of pure terror. Eris's own brain caught up with his mouth. The blood drained from his face. What have I done? He had just insulted the absolute monarch of the most powerful empire in the local cluster. He had, in a single stupid sentence, probably started an interstellar war. He braced for the guards to seize him, for Kthar to denounce him, for the extra to finally speak and pronounce a sentence of death or exile. The extra moved. She leaned forward, a slow, deliberate motion that broke her statue-like stillness. Her head tilted further. The kaleidoscopic eyes focused on Eris with an intensity that felt like a physical weight. The bioluminescent nodes on her body flared, cycling through a rapid, confusing series of colors: amber, then stark white, then a deep, pulsating magenta. The silence stretched for an eternity, 10 seconds that felt like 10 years. Then she spoke. Her voice was not the dry rustle of Kthar. It was a low, melodic chime, like crystal bells struck deep underwater. It was the first time any human had heard it. The universal translator in Eris's ear, after a noticeable lag, processed the words. "Extra, I accept." Eris blinked. I beg your pardon." "Extra, the proposal is acknowledged and accepted. The bonding ceremony will commence upon the next cycle." Kthar looked as if he'd been struck by a stun bolt. "Your Eminence. This is the protocols. The suitability assessments. The dynastic implications." The X3's eyes shifted to the Chancellor. The magenta pulse in her nodes intensified. The pinnacle has spoken. The matter is settled. She then stood, a fluid, powerful uncoiling of her 8-foot frame. She looked down at Eris, who was still rooted to the spot, his mind a screaming vortex of confusion and panic. Extra, you will be provided with suitable attire, consort. And with that, she turned and swept from the chamber, leaving a room full of stunned, silent Vlar and 3 utterly bewildered humans. The following hours were a blur of controlled chaos. The human delegation was escorted, not to their ship, but to a lavishly appointed suite within the royal spire. Their comms were not confiscated, but a polite but firm Vlar functionary informed them that all outgoing transmissions were now subject to Imperial security review. Eris sat on a bench that felt like carved obsidian, his head in his hands. "A wife," he muttered. "I said she'd make a cute wife." "The translator is accurate," Lena said, her voice trembling as she scrolled through a datapad furiously. The Vlar word used was Kthara. It's a root word, it doesn't just mean spouse. It's, oh stars. What? What is it? Eris looked up, his face ashen. It's a political and biological term. The closest translation is prime consort. But it's more than that. In their social insects-inspired hierarchy, the extra is the sole breeding female, the queen in the literal sense. The Kthar is the chosen male. It's not a marriage, Eris. It's a merger. You didn't just propose to her. You, a representative of Terra, effectively proposed a permanent political and biological union between our species. The weight of it crushed him. He hadn't just caused a diplomatic incident. He had, with a stupid off-the-cuff joke, voluntarily annexed humanity into the Vlar Imperium. "We have to explain," Eris said, standing up. "It was a joke. A figure of speech. We have to tell them it was a misunderstanding." He stormed to the door, where 2 impassive Vlar guards stood. "I need to speak with Chancellor Kthar. Immediately." The guard on the left swiveled its head. "The Chancellor is occupied with the bonding preparations. He is not to be disturbed." "This is insane." Eris insisted. "There's been a terrible mistake." The guard's voice was flat. "The extra does not make mistakes." Back inside, Lena was still digging. Their culture is so literal, so bound by ritual, that a public declaration of that nature, made before the court, it's legally and socially binding. To refuse it now would be to dishonor the extra in the most profound way possible. It would be an act of war far greater than any military attack. "So my choices are to marry a giant bug queen and merge humanity with her empire, or start a war we cannot possibly win?" Eris asked, his voice hollow. "It would appear so," Lena replied softly. The news, when it reached Earth 12 hours later through a tightly encrypted burst transmission, caused pandemonium. The Confederacy Senate was in an uproar. Some hailed Eris as a genius who had achieved through a single sentence what years of diplomacy could not. Others called for his immediate court-martial and execution for treason and gross incompetence. The public, however, was fascinated. The story was too bizarre, too surreal, too human not to capture the imagination. #CuteWife was trending on all global networks. Eris Thorne, the man at the center of the storm, was undergoing his own private hell. He was being measured, poked, and prodded by Vlar artisans. He was taught the ritual of the first touch, and the chant of shared breath. It was all terrifyingly real. He was granted one final audience with the extra before the ceremony. He was led to her private solarium, a room with a domed crystal ceiling looking out at the swirling magenta nebula that was the heart of the Vlar Empire. She was there, tending to a plant with glowing sapphire blue leaves. She turned as he entered. "Consort." "Your Eminence," Eris began, his voice tight. "We need to talk about this situation." "Extra, the situation is clear." "No, it is not," Eris said, his frustration boiling over. He fought to keep his tone respectful. "Your Eminence, my comment, it was not a formal proposal. It was a human expression. A joke. It was meant to convey warmth, familiarity. It was not meant to be taken literally." The extra regarded him, her head tilted. A joke. She tested the word. An utterance not intended to be truthful. A deception. "No." "Well, yes, but not a malicious one. It's a social tool. It breaks tension. It forges bonds." He was flailing. You sought to forge a bond, she stated. The method is irrelevant. The intent was perceived. I perceived it. How? How could you possibly have perceived an intent to propose this? Eris gestured around them, at the entirety of the insane situation. She took a step closer. She was immense, her presence overwhelming. For 5 cycles, I have watched you, Ambassador. I have watched your species. Your delegates argued with passion, but not with rage. They defended their interests, but showed flexibility. They displayed frustration, but never hatred. They are a chaotic thread, but a strong one. She paused, her eyes seeming to look through him. And you? You were the focal point of the pressure of your entire civilization. You were subjected to our most tedious protocols. You were tested, and you did not break. You did not grovel. You did not threaten. And at the moment of maximum tension, you did not resort to formal, empty words. You looked at the pinnacle of an ancient empire, and you offered a gesture of personal affinity. Goo. She made a sound, a soft, chiming click that the translator did not interpret. Was it laughter? No Vlar has ever dared to speak to me in such a way. They see only the throne. You saw me. And you found me. Goo. She said the alien word with a strange delicacy. It was an assessment of unparalleled audacity. It demonstrated a strength of character no suitability test could ever measure. It was, therefore, the most sincere and valuable proposal I have ever received. Eris was speechless. His stupid joke, born of exhaustion and despair, had been interpreted as the ultimate act of courage, as a display of strength. He had broken their unbreakable protocol, and she hadn't seen it as an insult, but as a qualification. Your Eminence. Extra. He stammered. You will call me Zara, she said. It was the first time he had heard her personal name. The bonding ceremony is in 3 cycles. Prepare yourself, Eris Thorn of Terra. The ceremony was a galactic spectacle, broadcast across the Imperium and to a stunned Terran confederacy. Eris, dressed in absurdly ornate robes that shimmered with captured starlight, went through the motions in a daze. There were chants, symbolic exchanges of light from glowing crystals, and the first touch, where he had to place his bare hand on the chitinous plating of her upper arm. Her skin was smooth and warm, like polished stone left in the sun. It was done. Eris Thorn, Terran Ambassador, was now Consort Kthara, mate to the Extra. Narrator, life as the consort was a gilded cage. Eris had unparalleled access, but no real power. He was a symbol. The Vlar court treated him with a distant, formal respect, but he could feel their disapproval. He was an anomaly, a disruption to their perfect order. He was chaos, given a title and apartments. Zara, however, was a constant surprise. In public, she was the unmoved, the pinnacle. In their private chambers, she was different. She asked him endless questions about Earth, about human emotions, about art, about music. She was particularly fascinated by the concept of family, not as a dynastic unit, but as a web of affection and conflict. You argue with those you love, she asked one evening, watching a historical drama he had uploaded for her. Constantly, Eris said, a real smile touching his lips for the first time in weeks. It's how we know the relationship is strong enough to survive disagreement. She was silent for a long time. This is a strange strength. A chaotic strength. Meanwhile, Lena Petrova, now the de facto Terran liaison, worked tirelessly. She used Eris's unique position to push for small changes. She argued for a joint research station, framing it as a shared nest for knowledge. She suggested a cultural exchange of artisans, subtly introducing human engineers and doctors into Vlar society. The first test of this bizarre union came from an unexpected direction. A fringe Vlar traditionalist faction, the Cthrix, saw the human contamination as a blasphemy. They launched a coup. It was swift and brutal. Imperial guards loyal to the faction stormed the royal spire. The hallways echoed with the sizzle of plasma fire and the screech of clashing chitin. Eris and Zara were in the solarium when the doors were blasted open. A Vlar warrior, his carapace painted with the crimson sigils of the Cthrix, stood there, a massive plasma rifle leveled at Zara. The pinnacle has been flawed, the warrior hissed. The chaos ends now. Eris acted without thought. There was no strategy, no grand heroics. He was a diplomat, not a soldier. But he was a human. And in that moment, the deeply ingrained primal instinct to protect his own overrode everything. He didn't throw himself in front of the blast. That would have been futile. Instead, he did something utterly, profoundly human. He shoved Zara backwards, behind the bulk of the crystalline throne, and then he turned to face the warrior. He raised his hands, not in surrender, but in a placating gesture. A human gesture. "Wait," Eris said, his voice steady despite the terror freezing his veins. "Just wait. Talk to me. What is it you truly want? A purer empire? Or just a deader queen?" The warrior hesitated, thrown by the illogical response. A proper Vlar would have fought to the death or accepted his fate. This chaos was disorienting. "She has broken our sacred ways. With you," the warrior snarled. "And killing her fixes that?" Eris pressed, taking a small step forward, his eyes locked on the warrior's multifaceted ones. He was playing for time, for a distraction, for a single second. "It just makes you a regicide. The empire will fracture. Is that your purity? Civil war? Is that the Vlar way?" He was channeling every negotiation, every debate, every stupid argument he'd ever had. He was using the human weapon of talk. In that moment of hesitation, the loyalist guards arrived. The fight was short and vicious. The traitorous warrior was subdued. Silence returned to the solarium. Zara emerged from behind the throne. She was unharmed. She looked at Eris, who was now trembling, the adrenaline crashing out of his system. He had nearly died. For her. She walked over to him. Her upper hands, the delicate ones, came up and gently cupped his face. The gesture was unmistakably human. She had learned it from him. "You faced a warrior's blade with a diplomat's words," she chimed, her voice soft. "You protected me not with greater strength, but with greater understanding. This is the human strength. This is the chaos you bring." She looked from Eris to her gathered guards, to Chancellor Kthar, who had arrived, breathless and horrified. "The Kthriks believed humanity made us weak," Zara announced, her voice ringing with the authority of the pinnacle. "They were wrong. Today, a human, my consort, demonstrated a strength they cannot comprehend. He did not seek to destroy his enemy. He sought to understand him, to reason with him. In that moment, he was more Vlar than they. For is not the highest strength the strength of an unassailable will? His will was to protect, and he used the only weapon he had. His mind. His words. His humanity." Kthar bowed his head low. The guards followed suit. The perspective of the entire Vlar court shifted in that instant. The chaos was not a weakness. It was a new kind of order. A resilient, adaptable, terrifyingly brave kind of order. The coup was the turning point. The human contamination was no longer seen as a stain, but as an upgrade. The joint projects flourished. Human doctors, with their intuitive holistic approach, made breakthroughs in Vlar medicine. Our engineers, with their talent for improvisation, solved problems the Vlar had considered intractable. Our artists created works that moved the stoic Vlar in ways they could not explain. Eris and Zara never did produce a hybrid heir. The biology was too incompatible. And in the end, it didn't matter. The bond they had formed, born from a misunderstanding and forged in crisis, was stronger than genetics. It was a bond of mutual respect, of curiosity, and of a deep, abiding affection that transcended species. Years later, Eris stood with Zara on a balcony, watching a joint Terran-Vlar fleet conduct exercises, their different ship designs, the blocky, pragmatic human vessels and the elegant, crystalline Vlar warships, flying in perfect, harmonious formation. "You know," Eris said, slipping his hand into one of her lower ones, a gesture that had become their own private ritual. "I really was just making a joke that day." Zara's chiming laughter was a beautiful, familiar sound. "I know, my consort. But sometimes, the universe has a better sense of humor than we do. You looked for a treaty and found a wife. I looked for strength and found a heart." She looked down at him, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the starlight and the face of the man who had, with a single ridiculous sentence, changed the fate of two species. And for the first time, the galaxy understood what it truly meant to be human. It is not just about our strength, or our intelligence, or our compassion in isolation. It is about our audacity to find light in the darkness, to find connection in the void, and to find love in the most unexpected of places, even and especially when we're just trying to be funny. It is our chaos, our beautiful, unpredictable, and resilient chaos, that is our greatest gift to the stars. If this story moved you, subscribe for more human stories from the stars.